Hi everyone, welcome back to this channel of crafting, crochet and knitting. My name is Nikki. How are you guys doing? As always, let me know by leaving a comment down below. I am super excited for this episode, even though I am losing my voice, so I do apologise if I have to clear my throat at any point, but I'm super excited because this is the Megasode about variegated and colour changing yarn that I'm doing in celebration of my 50th episode on the channel. So I'm really excited to make this video, but it is going to be a big one, so I'm going to be recording it in lots of different sections, and I'm also going to timestamp it, so if you're more interested in crochet techniques or you're more interested in knitting techniques, because I'm going to do both, you can skip forward to the bit that you're most interested in. Or if you're more interested in yarn, you know, stick around for the intro for this, where we talk about yarn. So yes, it's going to be about colour changing yarn. I'm going to talk a bit about the different types of colour changes that you might see in balls of yarn. I'm going to talk about some of the projects I've already done in colour changing yarn, so you can see some of those, like how they've worked up. And I'm also, like I say, going to be talking about crochet techniques and knitting techniques. I'm going to pick a few standard stitches that you'll come across in both crochet and knitting, and I'm going to work those stitches up in the same colours, different type of colourways, so that you can see the combinations of how the stitches and the type of colour change work together, and decide for yourselves which you prefer. I'm going to give my opinions on which I prefer and which ones I typically go for, but you'll be able to see in the swatch for yourself whether you prefer a long colour change with a double crochet, or whether you prefer a short colour change with a purl stitch. It's going to be completely up to you. I'm going to show you those so you can decide for yourself. So stick around if that sounds like it's going to interest you, and yeah, it's going to be a very yarn related, very craft related video, and I hope that you enjoy. So what are the different types of colour changing yarn that you might come across? So you might come across something which is simply a base colour with flecks of colour in it. So for example, I have this yarn here that has a white base with some blue flecks. I have this yarn which is a grey beige with some darker black and dark brown flecks in that. I've got some yarn here which has flecks of sparkle in it. This yarn here, which is slightly different because rather than it being flecks interspersed in the fibre, it's actually, let me get close up here and unwind some of this end. It's actually 3 strands, each with a strand of orange in it, and then each wound around a colour changing yarn that going between these purples and greens and blues and yellows. So the overall colour is a orange background kind of tone, but there's a lot more colour going on there that it's not really got the same effect as the flecks, which has the occasional patch of colour in it. Another yarn with some flecks in it is this white background with some pink, yellow, orange and blue flecks in here. So the overall colour is going to be quite white, but you can see that those flecks of colour actually stand out more than in something like this. Then, besides the flecks of colour that pop in a yarn, we have the actual variegated yarn. So this is where the colour is changing constantly throughout the fibre. Something like this, where we have one strand, but it is going between white and brown. Those variations have different lengths. So this is quite a short variation. This is only a few centimetres before it changes colour, and it does that pretty consistently throughout. There's just the occasional patch where there's not an awful lot of brown on the yarn, but other than that it's a couple of centimetres of each colour before it changes. And it's also only the 2 colours. We have other yarns which have equally small colour changes. There's the end for this one, but actually alternate between multiple colours. So there's a patch of red, yellow, green, a sort of a a sort of dusky blue as it goes back into red, yellow, red, green, and you can see how these are only about 10 centimeters each colour change. So that's still pretty short because you're only going to get a few stitches more in knitting than you would in crochet, I think, but you're only going to get a few stitches out of one colour before the colour changes into the next. It's the same as with this one. I actually thought that this was a much longer colour change when I first looked at it, but it turns out that it is still quite short. And if I unravel it, so we've got purple, blue and pink here, and you can see that that purple patch there is only about 5 centimeters before it turns into the purple, blue, pink, purple, pink, blue. So yeah, quite quick colour changes in this yarn as well. So when you have a short colour change like that, you want to be careful that you pick the right stitch for it, because you may or may not like the effect that the colour changing halfway through a stitch has on your work. So this is also quite a short colour change, and you wouldn't think it to look at it because there are lots of patches of purple and yellow, and that is kind of an example of colour pooling, except that we haven't stitched this, we've just wound it. It just so happens that the width of the ball when winding this is also the width of the colour change, so the yellows are meeting up on the same side of the wind and the purples are meeting up on the same side, and the effect is this patch of purple and patch of yellow and patch of blue that you're not necessarily going to get in your work, but the colour changes themselves, like I say, they change with the width of the ball. Now this might feel longer because it's more like a foot of blue before the change, but bear in mind that this is a thicker yarn, and that means that this stitches used in this yarn are also going to be bigger, so it's still quite a short colour change for what it is. I'm just going to go and pause the video while I rewind this because it fell on the floor and a lot more unwound than I intended. So those were the flecks of colour and the short change variegated yarns. But what about the long change variegated yarns? Now these kind of come under two names. You get just variegated yarn when you actually then look at it, it's actually quite a long colour change, or you sometimes have it being called self-striping yarn. Now you've got to be careful with self-striping because the length of the colour change and then the length of the garment that you're making are kind of needed to, you know, be consistent in order to get a stripe. So you could have a self-striping sock yarn where there's maybe, you know, a metre of a colour change, and that might be enough to do, you know, 2 circumference around your ankle in the sock, so you get a little bit of a stripe. But that wouldn't go around someone's body in the same way. It would only go around once and a bit, so you're not going to get the same stripe. So let's take a look at some and see if we can work out like whether they are for small projects, so baby cardigans or socks, or whether they could work for longer ones. So I've got a few examples here. This is probably the most obvious one that's going to work for a bigger garment. This is a 500-gram ball of yarn. It's got 1900 meters in it, and so you've got all of this yarn in this red tone, and it subtly turns into more of a scarlet and then into the mustard. So yeah, this garment is going to be enough meterage to this yarn is going to be enough meterage in order to make an adult garment, and by the end of it you're going to have these stripes in more of a yellow tone, more of a scarlet tone, and then more of the burgundy tone. However, something like this, which is only 100 grams, even though the colour changes are really long, there are actually a couple of colour changes from pale to pale in this one 100-gram ball, which means the stripes are going to be a lot smaller. On a baby garment, this is fine, they're probably going to be striped, but if you are going to use lots of this yarn to make an adult-sized garment, you're going to have more colour pooling, where, you know, occasionally the pale happens to overlap with other pale and you make a patch of pale colour. It's going to be more of a colour pooling than a stripe. So, how long is a long colour change, you might ask? So I have got this left over from when I made my summer wrap. Now I used a quite lacy pattern with the summer wrap because I knew the colour change wasn't enough to do a stripe on a adult garment, but it would be enough to do a sort of overall stripy effect if I did a very netty pattern. So that is all of the orange that is left on here. There's a little bit of pale green in here as well. So this is working out to be maybe 3 meters of orange. And like I say, that was enough to get a stripe in a more netty stitch, but probably not enough to get too many stripes actually around my body as an adult if I was just doing more of a simple crochet stitch or a simple garter stitch in knitting. So I've got a couple more here. This one claims to be a self-striping yarn, and the ball band has even got this example of how it's supposed to work up. Bear in mind that's going to depend very much on how many stitches you cast on, but I unwound it and rewound all of the red colour. So I unwound it until it started changing into the magenta, and then rewound it all around here. So this is majority red. It goes around several times. It was quite a significant amount of red, definitely 5+ meters of red. So if I had more of this, this would probably make a stripy garment for an adult. I just only have the one ball. What else have we got here? We've got this one, another 100-gram ball. Again, this has got some quite long colour changes, but it does have 3 or 4 different sections of pale. So depending on what garment you made this into, you might get stripes or you might get pools. And then we've got these two. So these are also claiming to be a self-striping yarn. Now, I've actually seen this worked up and in a sort of baby blanket sized cast on, and it does make a pattern very similar to what they show on the ball band. So this is very much going to have lots of long colour changes, probably 5 meters plus again, in order to get that stripy effect on such a large cast on. Same with this one, that's a different colourway. These here are also pretty long. I was surprised when I opened them up because looking at it, it doesn't look like the colours are very long colourways. But when I started unravelling it, so the blue is starting here, and I'm going to regret this, I know I am. If I start unwinding it until it becomes the grey, okay, yeah, so there's the grey starting. So that's, again, that's about 3 meters again as well. So big colour changes in there, not quite as big as in this one, but still enough to produce quite a bold stripe in the work rather than the more mottled effect of the short colour changes. Now, it's all well and good me talking about all these different types that you might look at. It helps to be able to unwind them a little bit in the shop so you can see whether you're working with a short colour change or a long colour change. But I don't know many shops that would let you unwind a whole ball. So you do have to be careful. Don't look at a ball and assume that it's long because there are these patches. That's not always going to be the case. Like I said, these ones came in patches and it just happened to be because the colour change was the width of the ball. Here it's because actually 3 meters wrapped around several times does produce a patch of colour. So you can't really tell from the outside what you're looking at. Like I say, try and unwind even just a little bit so that you can see whether it's a long-ish colour change or a short one. You should be able to tell at least if it's a short one pretty quickly, because with something like this I only needed to unwind it that much to see, oh okay, actually it's changing every sort of 5 centimeters. So you could probably infer, sort of a bit of a lucky guess, that if it hasn't changed in 5 or 10 centimeters, then it's probably going to be a longer colour change like in these. So yeah, that was just a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the yarn. I'm now absolutely surrounded by balls of yarn. Some of them have their bands on, some of them don't, some of them are in their bags and some of them aren't, so I'm going to have to tidy that away before it really gets to me. But yeah, just a little look at some of the different types of colour changes that you might see, and then I am going to show you some of the projects that I've made with some of these yarns so you can see how they work up with the patterns I just happened to choose for them. And then I'm going to actually look at some of the crochet stitches and knit stitches for some of these balls of yarn and show you how the different short colours, flex and long colour changes all work up in those different stitches, so you can see for yourself which designs you like. So I'm going to put these away and I'll be right back. Okay, so I tidied up some of the yarn and got out a few of the projects that I've made using some of the yarns that I had on display a moment ago. So let's start with this cardigan because I absolutely love it. And it displays a few of the principles really well actually. So I actually didn't get to speak about this yarn. It's a pretty unique example. The colour changes are actually quite short for the most part, so you get this mottled effect as the white in particular is flitting in and out of the dye. But overall there's this longer colour change. There's this patchwork of brown followed by a very pale white, by an orange, a pale white, a brown, a gold, and then a brown, and that just cycles through the yarn. So actually that's a combination of the short variation and the long variation to get this lovely effect. And this is a baby cardigan, so the changes aren't too drastic, but you can see how this is a stockinette stitch in knitting, and this is a rib stitch in knitting, and you can hardly see the rib stitch pattern in the collar or in the cuffs because it's been washed out by the mottled effect of the variation in the yarn. It's kind of similar on the inside of the stocking stitch where you get the garter texture. It's not clear whether the texture being sort of that garter mottling or the colour being the mottling is meant to be the overriding effect, whereas it's quite clear on the back where you've got the more structured V shape of the other half of the stocking stitch, that it's the colour that is actually meant to be showcased in this piece. And this was made out of this yarn here, so you can't really tell too much from the front what it's going to look like. You can kind of see these bands of golden brown. Can't really see a very orange example at this point in the yarn, but you can also see how quickly the yarn is sort of changing as well, that short-term change, particularly around here. So you do have to get it out and unwind it a little bit to kind of work out what's going on. That's the baby cardigan. What else do we have on this side? So we have got a big granny square blanket. Now to look at this, you probably can't tell that it's a granny square. And that's a bit of a problem with the stitches that I used to make this. So here's the UK triple or US double stitches that make up a typical granny square. Yeah, so I used this yarn here, which is that yarn that has the background of white, but then has the pink, blue, yellow and orange flecks in it. But those flecks are at such regular intervals that they're not like a splash of colour, they are more dominant. So when you look at the piece, it's kind of quite colourful. Pastel, but colourful. And because it comes across again mottled because there's such a short colour change, you can't see the texture. The texture is being washed out by the mottling of the colour. So that's that blanket there. Then what else have we got? We've got this. Now this is getting frogged back, mostly because I just don't like the design I was attempting to do. It was meant to be a little baby jumper. Not such a fan of it, and I've definitely improved since I attempted to do this, so it's on its way out. But this is just garter stitch in knitting using that short colour change, purple, pink and blue yarn. This is how it's working up. These are examples of colour pooling. So this little patch of pink coming together, patches of purple coming together, you know, different patches, different sized blotches of pink and blue and purple all across the work, where those short variations just happen to have lined up by chance. So it's not a repeatable thing that you're going to get. Again, even though it is colour pooling, they are such small patches that I feel like they're getting a little bit lost in the garter stitch. So I do want to see using this video actually whether a stocking stitch or something else will bring a better colour pooling effect out of this yarn. So that's going to be front back. On this side as well, we have got socks. Now, two very different types of socks. We've got the colour pooling random colour changes from this yarn. So again, much bigger patches though. It's not they're not quite stripes. They are definitely bigger patches of colour, and they do go a fair way around the foot, but they don't go all the way around the foot. So they are still just coming together by chance to make these blotches. So again, there you go, it hasn't gone all the way around the foot there. And that's different from these, where the manufacturer has taken a typical adult foot circumference, which is about 60 to 70-ish stitches, and worked out what the gauge is for their size of yarn, roughly speaking, sort of the average gauge, and then done their colour changes in such a way that you get 3 or 4 rows of some colours before it changes. You get more like 5, 6 or 7 in those, 1 here, and this is a repeating pattern. So there, here, it's not exact, but then you've got these patches as well. So the heel being here has also affected how big those are at any given point, because obviously it's not just 60 stitches. For me it's 60 stitches in the leg, but then when you extend it for the heel and for the gusset, there's more than 60 stitches here before it gets decreased. So yes, those are the ones which are long colour changes, several meters, so that when they go around your ankle several times you actually get a discernible stripe. Same with these ones, except rather than having different sizes of stripes, so 7 or 8 against 3 or 4, these are all pretty much equal width. So there's about 3 green, 3 of this speckled, 3 dark green, speckled, light red, speckled, dark red, and that's the repeating pattern. Really love my Christmas socks. Really love my Christmas socks. I know it's July and I'm being very good, but I do like them. They're very on brand. We've also got an interesting effect with this sock. So this sock here I made for baby out of some scrap yarn after I made my husband's sock. Now my husband's sock is going to have been about 64, I think, was the stitches that I did when I cast on for his leg. And that yarn very much colour pooled in blues, like this one has been colour pooling in pinks and reds. But when I made a smaller baby foot, the amount of yarn that was making a sort of a pooling patch in an adult sock actually makes 1 or 2 stripes around a baby's ankle. So you can kind of see when I was decreasing that it went back to pooling more, but by chance the size I cast on for the actual foot and leg of the baby sock ended up striping. So goes to show you that the length of your colour change really has to match the effect that you want in the length or the circumference or diameter or whatever of your garment. Similar thing happened with this one as well. Pretty short colour changes in this ball of yarn. I haven't showed you the ball of yarn because I don't know where it's currently at, but they are relatively short colour changes. It's just that this is also a relatively small sock, so getting a little bit of a striping effect. I mean, that one has changed there. I think it might be starting here and going most of the way round. So this is sort of striping, but on like half-foot stripes. So the stripes don't go all the way around, they're misaligned, but they are doing about half the foot at a time. So you still get a stripy sock. And this has got ribbing and stocking stitch in, so you can again see the difference between letting the colour just have front and centre stage and then it taking a little bit of a back seat whilst you try and get some texture. You can see the texture, but I think that's because there's so much of the texture that it helps rebalance that collision between the texture or the colour being the thing that takes your attention. I really like those socks as well. They're incredibly jazzy socks. So that is everything on this side. What have we got over here? Over here we have got a baby blanket and a scarf that I made out of pretty much the same brand of yarn, different colourways. And I did this all in garter stitch. I made the blanket squares in garter stitch, and looking back, I don't really like that. They're short colour changes again, and you can tell that even without the ball, because as you worked it up, there are these sections here where yellow and purple and blue are sort of overlinking like this. So that yellow would have been a patch of yellow that turned into a patch of pink, that turned back into a patch of yellow, and those two purples there again also overlapping by accident, but over here they haven't overlapped. So from a distance you get this patchy, blotchy colour pooling, but when you look close up you can kind of see the garter stitch texture. So I'm not a fan of that. I figured that because this is just two balls of yarn worked up together, that I can easily frog this back and turn this into a baby cardigan using something similar to this pattern, and hopefully the stocking stitch will bring out sort of a more smooth transition in the colour. I don't know, we'll see. That's an experiment I can do in this video. But this one is already stitched together in a blanket, and I think I'm just going to leave it because the baby's the only one that's going to see it, and the clashing of texture and colour is actually going to be really good for a baby's development. So it's not such a problem, I don't think. Okay, so I don't know what happened there, but my video footage seems to have been interrupted, deleted, I don't know. So I'm now making this little inserted clip in terrible lighting because I want to finish editing this video. So apologies, but I had a few more projects to run through that I missed off there. So the first one is this granny square hat using an incredibly short colour change variation. So the yarn stored inside it, but you can see how those colour changes are only about 1 centimetre or 2 long. And it's, I think I said it's granny square patterning, then with a little peaked edge. But this is going to be a frogged back project because I just don't like the overall effect. I don't like that you can't actually see that it's granny square. It could probably be worked up better in just complete triple stitches in UK terms, or in double stitches UK terms. Something where you don't have these gaps, because you can't see those gaps anyway. I don't like it, I'm not a fan, so yeah, that's going to get worked up into something else. What I do like is are these two garments. So this here I've shown off fairly recently. This is a long colour change yarn, and I used a meshy crochet pattern. So these are double tribbles in UK terms, and chain 4s to make this mesh, and that just means that those long colour changes that ordinarily would probably only do a couple of rows of a child's garment before the colour change have been stretched out to actually do a couple of rows of an adult garment before the colour change. And I think it's worked out really nicely, and the colour changes are really subtle. I think there's one up there but you can hardly notice, and it's got this lovely shine to it. I'm so upset that I can't show you this in natural light because it is absolutely beautiful when it's got the sunlight on it. On the other side we have my my knitted shawl, and again the natural lighting would be so much better for this because you would then be able to really easily see some of these more subtle colour changes. There's one there as well. So this was made out of a 500, well, part of a 500 gram ball that transitioned from a mustard yellow through to a burgundy red, and those transitions are sort of, they could be more subtle. You can see the transition in this garment, but I don't think that's a problem because it's such a long colour change that you do actually get a discernible stripe on an adult sized garment. So I think that that is absolutely fine, and those two are some of my favourite early garment makes before I started transitioning into cardigans and jumpers. So I'm really proud of those. I mean, I say early. The shawl was early. this wasn't really early, but it was sort of before I started doing a lot of the baby cardigans. And the last thing that I was going to show you is just an example of a flecked yarn. So I do in fact have the cable cardigan as well, so if I insert a picture of that too. So both of these are examples of flecked yarns where you're not really getting a true variation. It's not true variegated yarn, you've just got colours sort of woven into the fibre, and those colours kind of occasionally pop, but the good thing about those is that they almost never take away the attention from the texture. So you can either do something pretty simple like this with the yarn, or you can do something more complicated like the cable patterning in the cable jumper. So yeah, two examples of where actually you can have a pop of colour, but the colour most definitely takes a back seat. So yeah, that's it on the garments, and so let's get on and talk about how these different lengths of colour change work up in some standard crochet stitches and some standard knitting stitches. So I will go back to daytime recording me for those clips. Okay, so let's take a look at how some of these variegated yarns with different lengths of variation in their colour work up in crochet stitches. So for this I did a few different standard crochet patterns. I made a simple section with just US single crochet or UK double crochet, and I made a section of US double crochet, UK triple crochet, and a section of sort of granny square-esque clusters of treble stitches if you're in the UK, or double stitches if you're in the US. This is going to get really confusing really quickly. I can't even promise to only talk in UK terms, because even though I'm from the UK, I use US patterns all the time. So I'll try and make sure that whichever one I do say, I tell you which term it is in. So yeah, one of the first ones I've got here is this yarn, which is shortish colour changes, so maybe about 10 centimetres of each colour, something like that. So yeah, not very much yellow in there. So quite a short colour changing yarn. So here are the effects that we have. So, oh, this is terrible lighting, I do apologise. So yeah, we've got, here is the US singles, here is a patch of US doubles, so you can see those, and here is a patch of granny square, which I am beginning to unravel. That's not very good. I thought I closed that off. My apologies. So yes, you can see how the colour here is a lot more mottled. It's difficult because I've sort of accidentally picked a width for this swatch that is allowing the colour to pool. I think this is maybe more of an illustration of how you might expect to see it pooling in a bigger garment, where you've kind of got different colours overlaying in different areas. I was actually surprised with this one, with the US double stitches, because they are about the length required to make that stitch. So most of these, like up here, this is really pretty patch where each stitch is a different colour, but then you do get these ones every now and then where there's just not quite an even colour change, and you get these mixed stitches, and I'm really not a fan of mixed stitches. This means I don't typically like this in a granny square formation, because even though you might get 3 of each colour, assuming you don't get too much colour mixture going on, it's just not very consistent to me. It's very loud. I mean, this is a very loud loud ball of yarn anyway, but there's just too much going on. There's too much texture for me and too much colour in the same swatch. So feel free to make your own decision, but there is an example of a short colour change in 3 different crochet stitches. So depending on what effect you're going for, you know, this is what it works up like. So then we have got a slightly less loud version over here. This actually came from what was left of a yarn that I tried to make into a hat. And this really sparked this conversation for me, this hat, because I don't like the finished product. So this is pretty much just granny square clusters all the way around. And I'm not a fan. So I've done the same thing where I've crocheted up in a couple of different textures. I've actually added another one to this as well. So this is a mesh. So this is, so in the US these would be triple stitches. And then chain fours, and then triple stitches. In the UK, I think this is a double triple. So what you do is you yarn over twice, go into the stitch, and then do your pull throughs, etc., and finish the stitches two at a time. So it makes this very mesh-like grid. I actually think this is better than the granny square section underneath it. So this sort of bit here. I think because the fact there's more space, I think allows the speckling to kind of pop a little bit more, whereas I think here all that happens is you've got a dark background, you can't see the spaces very well. So and then here we have at the bottom here single, US single and US double stitch bits. You can't even really see where I change very well. It's here that I change, so everything, let's just fold it over. Everything here is a US single. So this is okay, bit speckly. I think because you're not trying to have the gaps, you're just making a single thick piece of fabric. The speckling is speaking for itself. Even actually in the US double, I don't think that's so bad either. Actually, if I flip it over, I don't think that's so bad either. I think because you've got such a closed stitch going on there. So for context, these colour changes are only about 1 centimetre or 2 long. So these are a super small colour change compared to the last one. So you get a much more mottled effect in these. So yeah, that is the swatch anyway. Sorry about the absolutely terrible lighting. So you've got singles, doubles, granny square, and mesh. So yeah, I don't mind this, sort of what's going on here, because it's nice and thick, but here I feel like these gaps are too confusing. And again, I kind of like this as well, this isn't so bad. But what do you think? That's the most important thing. This gives you some idea of how super small colour changes will work up in different crochet stitches. The last one that we have is quite a long colour change. So again, I've done this in a couple of different stitches. Now we've got a very big patch here because I was actually swapping between the single and the doubles in US terms. And that's because I wanted to see how the colour changes actually worked up. So I did a lot of single here before I realised that I had a long way to go before I actually got a colour change going on. So this is all single, it's all pretty block colour because it's such a long colour change. Although bear in mind that this is just a swatch, and so in a garment this will probably only be 1 or 2 rows, depending on the size of the garment. So I swapped into a bit of double stitch. You can see the difference in this one, it's a nice shinier yarn. So you can see some of the colour changes. I don't think that's too bad in the grand scheme of things. That works out quite nicely, I think. I think it would look better in the round. So yeah, and then I swapped back into some singles, so you can see those colour changes in single. Again, I think that's okay. I think that would look good in the round. And then just swapped back into double again, just to get one final look at some colour changes. So I think this is where, if it's quite a quick colour change, it doesn't look as nice, in my opinion, in the double there. Compared to the sort of the slower colour changes that were going on here. There's sort of this green-grey going on. And then we have got a big patch of mesh. It had to be such a big patch because of the colour change. This, I've done a pattern, I've done a summer wrap in this in a different colourway, but in the same sort of long colour changes using mesh. And I think this works out quite nicely because, again, those colour changes become quite subtle rather than very blocky. But That's my opinion. Let me know if you like that. And the last is the granny square section. I was pleasantly surprised because it's such a long colour change. You don't often get mixed stitches, which is quite nice. The colours kind of block together quite nicely, so you get some variation in there, but it's a little bit more random. Yeah, pleasantly surprised with how this came out in a long colour change. So yeah, let me know what you think. Do you like the granny square section, or do you like the singles and doubles at the bottom there, or the mesh? I think it might help that this is a lighter colour change as well. I think that's something to consider. I think if you have a very dark patch that you're gonna be using on lots of different backgrounds, then the texture of a granny square can get quite lost. Whereas if it's a lighter yarn, you're more likely to be able to discern the texture on multiple different backgrounds. So if I just hold that up to a plain white, a changing one you can still see, and then a dark one you can still see where the holes are. Whereas, let's get this one back out. Whereas this one here, you can only really see the holes when you're holding it up to the white. So something to remember when you are adding that texture into your crochet patterns. But yeah, that is an example of a short colour change, a really short colour change, and a much longer colour change. Something to bear in mind though is that they are swatches, and so if you're looking for a bigger garment, you might want to do a bigger swatch to try and work out how long your colour changes and whether you will actually get a full row out of a certain colour, for example, when you're doing it. So yeah, that is crochet techniques with colour changes. Okay, so let's take a look at different knitting stitches and different knitting stitch combinations that work up in short and long colourways. So first we have this very loud, relatively short colour changing yarn. So each section is maybe 10 centimetres or so long. And here I've got a little swatch, just a little swatch showing some different stitches. So excuse me while I get close to the camera. First we've got a patch of garter stitch. So I am not a fan of this, I must say. I don't like how the ridge texture is so prominent in the work and it's competing with the colour change. Now I actually much prefer something like this next section, which is the stockinette section. So this is garter on the back, stocking on the front. I think that that allows the colour to stop fighting with texture because it's a smoother fabric. It's still a bit loud for me, but I definitely think that's the better of those two. And then we have the rib stitch. So this is so common on jumpers, you can't not look at how your colour works up in a rib stitch. You can barely see the rib stitch in my opinion. That colour is so loud. Again, it's fighting with the texture. You can't see the texture of the rib stitch. You know, I'm having to pull it out like this to even begin to see some of the difference. So that is a swatch with some rib stitch, some stockinette stitch and some garter stitch. Now if you have a different sort of opinion, that's totally fine. It really depends what you're going for, but in my opinion I am definitely a fan of this for the loud colour, and it's my intention to make a vest out of this little bit of yarn for a newborn with these really bright colours, because it'd be really good for a newborn's like development to see these bright colours. But I want to go for this smooth texture so that the colours actually don't have to fight with texture. I think that would be a bit too much. So that is this one. Then we have a shorter colour change. We actually have a couple of examples of a colour change that's shorter. So if I just get the ball of yarn, it's currently tangled around the ball band. These are only about 1 centimetre or 2 before they colour change. So these are really short colour changes. So again, we have got some garter stitch, we have got some stockinette stitch, and we've got some rib stitch. I am once again quite a fan of the stockinette in the middle there. This yarn is going to be mottled whatever you do with it, but I think that just letting it be mottled on a flat texture looks the best, looks the tidiest to me. I was actually surprised that this doesn't look as bad in the rib stitch as that loud one. Now that could be because there's only 2 colours, so there's less fighting for attention. You can discern some texture, but it's still not brilliant. A single colour, you would see the texture as the dominant feature. I was also surprised that I wasn't so offended by the garter stitch, again because it's mottled. I think that's because the rib, not the rib stitch, sorry, that's over here. The ridges even of the garter stitch kind of contribute to that mottling. I think that the garter stitch itself looks quite mottled in a block colour, so when those ridges are just in different colours, it supports the effect that the yarn is kind of going for. So actually pleasantly surprised by this yarn. I think that the solution for me with this yarn is to do something knitted with it rather than crochet. I'll talk about the crochet swatch in the next section of the video. You can see the difference. But of those 3, I'm not totally like jumping at one particular stitch. I think I could happily use all 3 in a project and just write it off as being it's the effect of using a variegated yarn. So that's a short colour change where it's just a couple of colours. Then we have a much bigger example. So this is a pretty short colour change using a few colours. This is more like 5 centimetres. So this is somewhere in between the 2. There's a couple of different colours in here, but they're quite complementary. They're not loud. Here is an example of the garter stitch, which I am not a fan of. So from a distance, it pulls quite nicely. But when you zoom in, you really see those ridges, and I think because there's more than one colour, we're not trying to mottle here, we are trying to colour pool. So that's where you get these sections of pink together, sections of blue together. We're trying to colour pool, and I don't think a garter stitch is doing us any favours. And I was 100% convinced of this when I followed my instinct and I made this cardigan instead. So here is an example of stockinette on the front here. That colour pooling is so much smoother. All the pink is genuinely together and it's not ridged. All the blue is genuinely together. All the purple is genuinely together. It's a much smoother texture, and the colour is, I think, really lovely, both from a distance and looking up close into this. We do have an example of the rib stitch on the collar here. You can see the texture, but I'm not a big fan. I think this is just an example of, yes, you need to rib stitch the collar, so that's what it is. But you can see how the colour pooling goes back to that sort of not a super smooth transition like this. There's sort of some ridges going on in there, like there's this random pink bit in the middle here where it hasn't quite pooled as nicely as over here. So I think that that is an example of, if you're wanting a mottled effect, you've really got to go for a really, really small colour transition, that like with this brown and white one. Anything bigger than that, so we've got a 5 centimetre colour change and then our 10 centimetre colour change, I think by the time you've got to 5 centimetres, you're actually in the territory of colour pooling rather than mottling. And I think that's a really important distinction to make when you're picking your yarn. What is the final effect that you're going for? So lastly, we have a long colour change, and this is a yarn that I thought would be a long colour change, but I didn't realise it was going to be essentially a self-striping. So let me show you what I've been working on. This has popped up in another video, so you might have seen it before. That's fine. I'm having to make these Megasode episodes a little bit in advance so that I've got time to edit. But here we have it. This is being made in the round. You can see that we've had a few rows of this red and a few rows of this small peach. Is it peach? Is it salmon? Rose? It's a little bit more orange than normal pink. So then we've got this different one here. So we've actually got a short colour change within the longer blue colour change, which gives us these little bits of texture. Same as down here, these are very short colour changes. They are about They're about the same as the brown and white, actually, looking at it, so that's how long the colour change is. So they give us this little patch of mottling just for a row or two, just for a row here, between the block colours, and I actually think that works really nicely. But then this is being worked in the stockinette stitch, which clearly is my favourite. I actually did start this project using a rib stitch from the outside of the yarn, which means starting with this colour, and I really hated it because you couldn't see the texture of the rib stitch. By comparison, you can see that texture in the red and the rosy salmon colours there. So when I get down to the bottom of the work, I'm going to try and finish the rib stitch with a block colour as well. Again, you've got a bit more block colour in this mint green, you've got a tiny bit of block colour in this line of emerald green, or is it emerald? Seafoam or bottle, I think is better. And then you've got more speckled bits as well, and it's turning into a self-striping. I'm actually going to have to think about how I do the sleeves on this piece of work, because I really want to make sure I line those up. So yeah, that is really quite incredible to be getting all of that from this one ball of yarn. So you can see the difference here. You can see how there are these long colorways in here. You really have to unravel quite a bit of the yarn before you see how long the color changes. So what I would say is, if you see these short color changes and you've also got these long patches here, just unwind it a little bit and see, because you're probably going to get a couple of lines of knitting out of the block colour before you then have to consider where the more mottled colour change is going to go. So that is the last example of a long colour change in knitting. So we have had short, super short, between the two, and long colour changes there with the knitting pattern, so with a garter stitch, a stockinette stitch and a rib stitch. So hopefully that will help you decide how you want to use your yarns in future. I'm a fan of the stockinette, clearly, but it really depends what you're going for. I think the main thing is try not to fight with your texture. You're either doing a textured garment or you're doing a variegated colour changing garment. You can get away with it maybe a bit more with block colour striping, so you've got colour changes in there, but ones that are block colour so some texture can come through. Just play around with it, see what you like, see what you don't like. Just don't get roped into buying these beautiful colour changing yarns without having some thought about the project that you would want to use them in. So there you have it, my 50th Megasode episode for this channel, celebrating all things variegated yarn. I hope that you have enjoyed this video. I hope that it has answered some of your questions about variegated yarn and colour changing yarn, and I hope that it also gives you some inspiration for ideas of what stitches with what colour changing lengths you would want to combine in your next project. So yes, I will see you in another video, a much shorter video, as I continue the podcast on this channel. So thanks for watching, and bye for now.